I was a nurse at a psychiatric hospital back in 1995. In the summer of 95, after graduating from nursing school, I was hired at a nearby psychiatric hospital, which I'll call Dover's for privacy reasons. At the time, I was living in the New England area, and let me tell you something, the summers there were beautiful. Anyway, due to budget cuts and deplorable conditions, there were even rumours of several doctors performing lobotomies back in the 30s and 40s. Dover's was slated to close in September of that year. At the time of my hiring, though, most of the 500 patients living at the Dover's were either released or relocated to other hospitals, leaving about 100 patients behind with 17 staff members, including 3 doctors and 4 nurses, including myself. Now, Dover's itself was a grand hospital with its Gothic-style architecture, and while it was open, was the talk of the town, both good and bad. Dover's was located on the edge of town and was surrounded by very dense woods with only one road leading in and out. Built in 1870, it was originally intended to house 200 patients with the purpose of treating the criminally insane, mentally ill and people suffering from TB in order to cure them. Unfortunately, though, over the years, as the population grew, overcrowding was a big issue, and by the 30s there were upwards of 3,000 patients at the hospital at any given time. Soon, though, due to the overcrowdedness, lack of funding and staff shortages, the hospital fell into disrepair. My job at the hospital was to watch over the remaining patients until they were relocated, about 2 months. As I previously mentioned before, there were 17 staff members left with a total of 5 floors being occupied. There were 3 doctors, 4 nurses, 2 CNAs, 4 security guards, 2 cooks and 2 maintenance people left. We were left to live at the hospital with our sleeping quarters being on the 1st and 2nd floor, while the patients were kept on the 3rd and 4th floors. But somehow, though, there was a miscalculation with the rooms, and therefore I volunteered to sleep on the 5th floor where I would be alone, which didn't bother me at all. It was a Friday when I arrived, and since I didn't have to report to work until Monday, I had the weekend to myself. Now, Dover's had several floors in total, with the 5th, 6th and 7th floor remaining unused after several patients died under mysterious circumstances back in the 70s. Of course, rumours were abound about the hospital being haunted, but at the time I didn't believe in the ghosts. After I met the other staff, I had dinner and decided to retire to my room. Now, the 5th floor had not been used for over 6 years, so you can imagine just how much dust had accumulated on everything. After cleaning my room, I took a shower and decided to turn in for the night. It was around 1 in the morning when something awoke me from a deep sleep. Adjusting my eyes to the darkness, I saw a figure standing at the edge of my bed. It appeared to be a woman wearing one of those old-fashioned nurses' uniforms. I quickly turned on the lights and poof, the figure was gone. After tossing and turning for about an hour, I finally fell asleep, and the next morning after breakfast, I decided to explore the rest of the 5th floor. Using a flashlight, I wandered the halls, peering into each room as I walked by until I reached the now abandoned nurses' station. It was as if time stood still. There was a long-forgotten coffee mug with coffee stains sitting on the counter, and all around the walls were old pictures of who I assumed were the nurses that used to live here. I studied the pictures well as I was curious about the previous staff that worked here. There was a picture that was taken during the Christmas of 1978, and I actually recognised Sue, not her real name, one of the nurses in the picture. I continued to explore the 5th floor until I began to feel sleepy. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the faint sound of a woman crying. Thinking it was one of my patients, I went to check it out. As I exited my room and entered the dark hallway, I noticed that the crying was getting louder. I began walking towards the nurse's station and stopped, as the crying seemed to be coming from somewhere in the back of the station. I nervously called out, "Hello?" but of course got no answer, and that's when I spotted it, a door I didn't notice earlier. I slowly walked over to the door and opened it and noticed how dark it was inside this room, so I started using my flashlight, scanned the room, and for a second I thought I saw a figure hunched over in the corner, and the crying abruptly stopped. Anyway, using my flashlight, I began to explore the office, and that's when I spotted the picture of Dr. Ryan, also not his real name. Dr. Ryan was one of the 3 doctors who remained behind at Dover's, and I had questions. It was the next day when I talked to Sue and asked her if any of the other nurses died here, and she said, as a matter of fact, a nurse that used to work here went missing about 17 years ago. It was rumoured that she was having an affair with one of the doctors, and that she was also pregnant with his baby. Do you know who it was, the doctor, that she was having an affair with? Nope, I don't. But I had a feeling I knew who it was, though. The remaining months were here without incident, and that was until the last week before the hospital was to close. The morning started out normal, it was my day off, and I decided to go and get some breakfast, and as I was about to enter the elevator to go down to the first floor, it began to malfunction. Then from behind me, I heard the most blood-curdling wail, almost like someone in pain, sending shivers down my spine. I stood there in shock, unable to move. Somehow, though, I built up enough courage to turn around, and that's when I saw the ghost of a nurse gliding towards me. Unable to move, she approached me, and within a blink of an eye, she placed her hand, which was somehow solid, on my shoulder, and then horrible images flashed before my eyes as I saw her being murdered. Then her killer, hiding her body somewhere on the 5th floor, and I saw who killed her. About an hour later, the hospital was bustling with police and forensic experts. I even saw them escorting Dr. Ryan out of the hospital in handcuffs. They had found Donna's remains behind the walls inside Dr. Ryan's old office. See, 17 years ago, Dr. Ryan, who was married, was having an affair with a nurse from the hospital, who I'll call Donna. Several months into the affair, Donna found out she was pregnant and threatened to tell Mrs. Ryan if he didn't divorce her. Scared his wife would leave him, he killed Donna in a fit of rage. After Dr. Ryan's arrest, I showed Sue the picture of Donna which I had found at the nurse's station, and she confirmed what I already knew. She was the nurse that went missing back in 1978. It was a few days after Dr. Ryan's arrest that the hospital closed its doors for the last time. As I exited the hospital, I felt a great sense of sadness, so I glanced up at the 5th floor one last time, and standing there at the window was Donna. I waved at her and she smiled at me, then vanished. At that moment, I felt a sense of calm. I often think about that time back in 95 and wonder if Donna finally found peace in the afterlife. I worked as a substance abuse counsellor and recovery life coach at a drug and alcohol rehab centre, and because I'm the new girl, I got stuck with the 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. group therapy sessions. One evening after I'd finished the last group therapy session for the day, I went back to my office to type up some notes, which typically would take me about 30 to 40 minutes. Since most of our substance abuse clients also had criminal records, and because we kept various controlled substances locked up at the facility, I'd walk around the entire building to ensure that every door and window was locked up tight before I left for the night. Given the calibre of some of our clients, I always carried a concealed 9mm handgun and always locked the front door anytime I had to work alone. One particular night I was sitting at my desk typing up my report when I heard the sound of footsteps in the office above me. The footsteps were heavy and sounded like a grown man walking around. No, it actually sounded like he was stomping around in the office above me. Since everyone else had left for work at 5, I knew I was completely alone that particular night. Again, I heard the footsteps above my office, so I thought to myself, fantastic, someone's broken into the office and I've got to be the one to go and confront them. I got up, pulled out my Glock 19 and began doing tactical clearing of the building, quietly working my way up the stairs. As I near the top doorway of the stairs, I checked the office to my left, then the bathroom next to it, and glanced down the hallway to the office where I heard the sounds coming from. I had a decision to make. Clear the rooms to my right or continue down the hallway toward the area where I heard someone. So I opted to head towards the potential threat and then complete my sweep in a clockwise pattern. I quietly glided down the hallway, continually checking my 6, until I got to the office and stealthily tried the doorknob. Locked. So I leaned in and listened at the door. Nothing. Turning to my right, I slipped down the hallway towards the group therapy room. Nothing there. Then I nearly pissed myself. Finally, I had to check one last place, the recovery room, where we put clients who are going through detoxing. I raised my 9mm. Around the corner of the room is what I saw that nearly made me piss my pants. In the semi-darkness of the room, sitting on the couch in front of me, was what appeared to be a dead woman with a blanket draped over her head and body. Every nerve in my body coursed with electricity as adrenaline jumped into my system. I quietly looked behind me. Nothing. Then I turned back and I spoke deliberately to the figure I saw sat in front of me. I've got a gun and you've got 3 seconds to very slowly pull that blanket down so I can see you. If you don't, I'm going to shoot you. Do you understand me? Nothing. I repeated louder. I am going to shoot you and kill you unless you slowly pull that blanket down so I can see you. Do you understand? Nothing. I glanced behind me one last time, then cautiously stepped forward with one hand, and I quickly yanked the blanket off and stepped back, ready to let air out of whomever or whatever was stupid enough to not comply with my orders. Nothing. Absolutely nothing but a bunch of couch throw pillows someone had stacked up on top of each other and then casually threw a blanket over. With my heart racing, I checked behind me, then I hauled tail downstairs, packed up my stuff and got the hell out of there. The next day when I got back to the office, I casually mentioned what had happened to me to a few other employees, but they were all really unimpressed. Oh, you finally met one of our ghosts, huh? What? Ghosts in the plural? Yeah, there's an upper half of an old man some have seen sitting at a desk doing some office work. He never really bothers us, he just kind of freaks you out when you walk into your office and you see him. Don't worry about him, he's normal. When we see him, he just vanishes. Oh, and there's a little girl you can occasionally hear bouncing a ball. She runs up and down the hallway, upstairs as well. They recited this to me all nonchalantly, like it's no big deal. Just another day, right? I've been a cop for a while now, and this is one of the calls that still haunts me. I get a call for a domestic assault that has just occurred, and I learn that the victim is at the neighbour's house. I get there and find the female victim's throat has been cut from ear to ear. The neighbour is holding a towel up to her slit throat, and the victim is struggling to breathe. The paramedics are on their way, and I take over holding the towel for the neighbour. I'm trying to apply enough pressure to reduce the bleeding, but not so much pressure that I'm strangling her. It was a delicate balance. Quick law lesson. You know that there are laws against hearsay, right? Basically, I can't testify in court about the events that someone else has told me about that I didn't witness. The person who witnessed it would have to testify. One of the exceptions is what's known as the dying declaration. If someone is on their deathbed and believes they are about to die, their statements are exempt from the hearsay rules. I have some serious doubts that this woman is going to live. I want to ask her who slit her throat. In order for it to qualify as a dying declaration, I need to be able to testify that she believed that she was about to die. So, I asked her 2 questions. The first was, who cut your throat? Which she answered. The second was, you realise that you may be about to die? Which she answered, yes. Our eyes were locked, and I still remember the emptiness in her eyes. Within a few minutes, the medics showed up, and my partner and I went next door to look for the suspect. The door was ajar, and we could hear a baby screaming upstairs. We went in with our guns drawn, and a metallic smell of blood was overpowering. We made our way upstairs, past smeared bloody handprints on the wall, and found the child upstairs. He was unharmed, and the suspect was long gone. Thanks to the excellent performance of the medical staff, the victim survived. I met with her a couple of weeks later, and I was very apprehensive to speak with her again. I had basically looked at her and told her that she was going to die. When she opened the door, I could tell that she didn't recognise me. She had very little memory of what had happened after she was assaulted. I told her who I was, and she hugged me, crying, and thanked me for saving her life. The suspect ended up pleading guilty, so I never had to testify as to what I had been told by the victim that night, but it still haunts me to this day. My dad told me this happened on his first year as a cop. He was on patrol like any other day when he got a call from the base, as he likes to call it, that he needed to go where a 911 call was dialed about a mile away. Kidnapping. He gets there and pulls up behind a green van sitting in the ditch and approaches it with his gun drawn. He opens the door, and the first thing he sees is a guy in his 40s in a blood-soaked shirt with blood seeping from the neck, where there was multiple stab wounds. He looks to the back of the van where he sees the kid, hands in his face, covered in blood and crying, with a Swiss Army knife on the floor. You can imagine what went down. Sure enough, the kid was being hauled away in the van, tied up with a nylon bungee cord, when he remembered that he had a 3-inch blade pocket knife, so he cut himself free and stabbed the kidnapper 9 times in total in the chest and neck while he was driving. After my dad called it in, he stayed with the kid, who was sobbing while repeating, "I killed him, I fucking killed him." He was going to take me away and rape me, so I killed him. My dad said that that was one of the worst ever calls he's had to ever attend. Just for context, I am male in this story. I have a hard time telling this story. I believed I'm a changed man, and I've done a lot of good and helped a lot of people, but during my youth I was a real piece of crap. I was around 24 years old and I found myself around with the wrong crowd, partying, doing drugs, and I ended up becoming addicted to meth. At the start of the addiction, it was manageable. I could still work and go about my day, but as I grew more and more addicted, the high needed to be high all day, and I ended up losing most of my friends and my job, and ended up roaming the streets and stealing to support my habit. The way it worked, while high, I kept myself rotting away in some drug house, but when the withdrawals came, well, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I became a totally deranged lunatic, willing to do anything to get my hands on some cash. One night I was totally dry and I begged every dealer to advance me some stuff, but to no avail. I'm getting more desperate and feeling the pulse of the withdrawals messing with my head. I decided to roam the streets in hopes to find anything to trade. Now, this wasn't my first rodeo. In most neighbourhoods, the police would be called if I even showed up there, so I wandered into a middle-class neighbourhood, way further than my usual spots. I tried to open the door on a few cars, but after setting an alarm off, I jumped like a chicken and hide in a corner, cowering in said corner. I see a house down a cul-de-sac, but the front door is slightly cracked open. The warm light inside tracks me like some type of moth to a flame, and as I approach, I notice the deadbolt is thrown, but it looks like the mat is stuck, so they probably thought it was shut and looked around, and it seems no one's around, so without much thinking, I decided to stealthily go inside. I admit I had no idea what I was doing at this point. I go inside and I am amazed. It's been such a long time since I went into such a nice house. It's warm, it smells really good. I'm almost hypnotized, so I sit on the sofa for a minute and just look around. Memories of a better time start flooding into my head, but I quickly come to my senses when I see a purse on the counter. I bounce off the couch and go running towards it, rummage around it, and jackpot. The wallet is thick, and I pull off at around $100 from it. Completely ecstatic, I look around and turn to leave. As I get to the entrance, I stop because a little girl is standing in the doorway looking like she was about to close the door, but we stare at each other, eyes wide open. My head is rushing from the roller coaster of emotions, and I went from ecstasy to being about to soil myself. It's over, I thought, but out of pure sheer panic, like I was possessed by some animal, I pounced on her, and I covered her mouth with my hand, just as the beginning of a scream was coming out of her. I'm in total distress, frantically looking around. The little girl was struggling, and I didn't want to hurt her in any way, but I desperately wanted her not to scream. I kept whispering for her to just be quiet, and I let her go, but I could feel her muffled screams under my hand. I suddenly felt a sharp pain on the side of my hand as she bit down on me. In frustration, I hold back a scream and lift my other hand, and I slapped her across the face. In that moment, she let out a sort of yelp and in response, but she stopped trying to scream at that time. After hearing some sounds upstairs, I quickly came back to my senses and made a beeline for the front door. And I can hear her screaming again for her daddy and other voices yelling in the distance. Every thought is racing into my head at once, and I honestly didn't mean to hurt her or act that way, and I made it back home later to that disgusting drug den. I didn't see anything specifically on the news, but there's no doubt that they were probably called the cops. I got away with it, and I must admit, the night of the incident, I got high again with the money I stole. I can only imagine the trauma that I brought to that poor kid. I've been sober for 12 years now, and I do my best to offset the karmic balance, but may God forgive me. So, this happened on the second weekend in February of '99. The actual park opened at 11 AM, so we used to spend the first 2 or 3 hours of our shifts basically doing cosmetic cleaning, testing rides, and generally making sure the park was ready to go for the day. The morning section of my shift involved helping out with the cleaning and prepping Fantasyland and Tomorrowland, so at one point I'm walking through the park and I see this guy, I'll call him Ron for privacy's sake, up on the platform for the Skyway in Fantasyland. He's sweeping away, whistling to himself, generally being the cheerful guy that he was. Ron was in his 60s at the time and had already been with us for like a year. Everybody liked him. He was older than most, but he was like super chilled out and really friendly and always willing to help out his fellow cast members. Like I said, we were one big family like that. We worked together, partied together, and some of us even lived together. I called up to him like, "Morning, Ron." He just smiles down at me, returns the greeting, and waves a little before going back to his sweeping. It was a beautiful morning, everyone was in a good mood, and it was another day in a literal paradise. So I'm walking towards Tomorrowland for a few more minutes when I hear this like slow electric whirring sound above my head. The sound of the skyway starting up as the 4-person gondolas start moving along the track. I still feel terrible that it took me as long as it did to realise what was so wrong about the situation. It was a Sunday morning and I was pretty tired and slightly hungover from going out drinking the night before with a few of the other cast members. Honestly, it took me a little while to stop blaming myself for not having prevented what happened, because I figured that if I'd have been a little bit sharper, I'd have been really able to help. But then it hits me. The gondolas are moving, pretty fast too, on their first test loop, and rest still up on the goddamn platform. Someone had switched on the goddamn skyway and they hadn't checked if the thing was clear or not, so I just started running back the way I'd walked, following the platform of the skyway and hoping I'd catch up to Ron before the gondolas reached him. I was running as fast as I could, trying to catch up with the lead gondola, but I just couldn't seem to close the distance in time. I looked up and see Ron whistling away to himself with his back to the gondolas, just not seeing them at all as they're approaching, so I start shouting up to him and trying to warn him before the gondolas knocked him off the skyway, which are like 60 feet up in the air. He hears me, turns around, and is obviously horrified to see that someone has turned the skyway on before checking it was clear. He was a mixture of anger and fear in his voice as he turns back around and starts moving as quickly as he can away from the gondola. But he just couldn't move fast enough. The thing caught up with him pretty quickly, but it didn't knock him off like right away. Ron grabbed onto the gondola and he tried to pull himself inside of it to stop him from falling, but he just wasn't strong enough, and all of a sudden I'm watching him dangling from the thing, in danger of falling the whole 60 feet onto the concrete below. I'm just shouting up to him, "Hang on, Ron, hang on, just hang on." But there was nothing I could do. I just had to watch him struggle to hold on to the gondola as it moved along the skyway, knowing it was only a matter of time before he could lose his grip and fall. I could see Ron looking over his shoulder and down at the ground below him every so often. I'll never ever forget that look of absolute terror on his face, or the feeling of pure helplessness I felt as I watched the whole thing unfolding. Then the gondolas start passing over these flower beds instead of the pure concrete. I figured the soil and the plants would have to be a better option to fall onto. It had to be. So I just start shouting, "Jump, Ron, jump! The flower bed, let's go!" Then I don't know if he deliberately let go or just lost his grip, but he fell 60 whole feet down and landed with an audible thump in the flower beds below him. Watching him fall was like slow motion or something. He seemed to fall so slowly, but I guess that's just because he had such a long way to fall. He was in a bad way when I reached him. He wasn't moving at all. He just lay there among the flowers, all glassy-eyed and wheezing and groaning in agony. And in the moment before I ran off to help, I saw him spit up some blood onto the bottom lip and chin. I was in tears by the time I found another cast member to help us, begging them to call 911 so we could get an ambulance out as fast as possible. The emergency services got there less than 20 minutes later, and they carried Ron out of the park on a stretcher before driving him over to the regional medical centre. We all prayed that he'd be okay, and it brought us a great deal of hope that he'd actually landed on the flower beds and not onto the straight concrete, which would have definitely killed anyone who'd fallen that far. But a few hours later, we got the word that he hadn't made it, that his injuries were just so bad that he passed away, despite what the hospital staff had done for him. The fall had just caused too much trauma, too much internal bleeding, and he slipped away after they'd operated on him to drain the blood from his lungs. Everyone that could get time off attended Ron's funeral. A little memorial was put up backstage for him so that we could all remember him at his best, with a smile on his face, instead of being scared and broken. Rest in peace, Ron. We love you, and we miss you. I waved at a man, and now I think he wants to hurt me. Every day I walk home from school with my friend because she only lives a little bit away from me, so our routes line up. At the start of the school year, we noticed there was a man usually looking at us from his bedroom window while we were walking home from school. Found it a little weird, but ultimately didn't think of it much. A few months ago, after the heat of the summer died down a bit, he started sitting out on his porch when we were walking by. Usually he would just smile at us. Sometimes I smiled back, but I usually just ignored him. One day, as I was walking by his house, he waved to me from where he was sitting. I stopped and waved back at him and told him to have a nice afternoon as I walked past. It felt a little weird because he didn't reply, but eventually I forgot about the whole thing. Once when my mother was at work and I was home alone, I noticed him walking past my house several times through the window. I felt very creeped out and uncomfortable. I considered talking to my parents about it just in case, but I ultimately convinced myself he wasn't doing anything, so it really didn't matter. Yesterday I walked home from school alone because I stayed behind with some other kids outside the school for a few hours since we had art club that day and I didn't want to walk home, just to have to come back fairly soon after. I had just bought myself a nice new pair of wired headphones a few weeks ago with money I'd been saving up. I was playing them over one ear as I was walking home. On the way home there is a public lot with a stable on it that I like to cut through to get into my yard as quick as I can rather than walking around the entire property. Sometimes people like to hang around it to meet up, but there wasn't anyone there that I could see. As I rounded the corner on the stables, someone grabbed the back of my t-shirt. From the way they were grabbing it, I could see part of their hand. I jerked forward and they grabbed the top part of my headphones. The wire was at the bottom part of the neck, and it got stuck for a moment, and I remember feeling like I couldn't get away if something very bad was going to happen. The wire eventually snapped and I took off running as fast as I could, screaming. They let go of my shirt and I hopped the half-little fence to our property and I ran as fast as I could out onto the sidewalk in front of my house because I was worried that it would take too long to unlock the door if they were following me. By the time I actually got to the sidewalk point, I was crying. I felt like I was going to collapse because I was just so scared. When I looked over my shoulder, I couldn't see anyone, but I kept running until I reached my friend's house, in case whoever was there was still around when I got back. When I got there, I was in tears, and it took a bit to explain the complete situation, because they couldn't understand me. I tried calling my mother, but she wouldn't pick up the phone. My friend's mum called the police, and they came to check things out. There was nobody at the stables, and they told me that it was most likely some kids trying to mess around, but they escorted me home to where my mother was waiting for me anyway. I didn't tell them about the old man because I was worried they would think I was crazy, considering he hadn't actually done anything. But there's something in my mind that keeps telling me that he was the one who grabbed me at the stables. When I was walking home from school today, I brought a screwdriver with me in case I needed to defend myself. I also had my friend with me. My mother offered to pick me up from school, but I was worried that if I had shown how the encounter had affected me, then it would make things worse. I had also avoided the stables, and my friend made sure I made it to the door. The guy wasn't on his porch today, and I'm not fully sure if it was him or not. I feel terrible that my headphones broke, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if they didn't. I will update if anything else happens. Update: my stalker still hasn't given up, and it's been over a month since this nightmare first started. The man who has been watching me as I come home from school has started walking back and forth to and from the sidewalk in front of my house again. He has done this 3 times since my last post, and every time I've seen it, I've been home alone. I've called my mother to let her know every time he's been around, and we have contacted the police to tell them that he keeps coming by our house, but they haven't been able to do anything except record it, since he's never actually stepped foot onto our property. Until recently. Starting this week, I started noticing tapping and scratching sounds from downstairs, starting as soon as it becomes dark. It's been worrying me a great deal, but I've been too scared to look outside until recently because my dogs weren't barking, and they always do if someone strange is outside. When I finally got the courage to look out the window, I saw a person hunched over a few feet from the entrance to our house. I couldn't see any of their facial features because they were wearing a large hoodie and keeping their face down. It looked like they were scraping something across the side of the house. Immediately I dialed the police and hid somewhere just in case they wanted to break in. As soon as the police arrived though, that person ran off and was not pursued. I spoke with the police when they started to check things out, but again nothing could be done as there wasn't any proof that anything had even happened at all besides them seeing him run away. They said that they'd keep an eye out in the future, but at the very most it was only trespassing. I brought up the fact that I was attacked not long ago by some strange man and that I thought they were the same person, but I was once again brushed off. The police said it was possible, but without any actual evidence that they were the same person, nothing could be done, since I couldn't accurately recognise the person outside my window and I wasn't seriously hurt. I don't know what kind of evidence is needed to do something about someone stalking a minor who is home alone, but apparently I didn't have it. This morning, a small brown package was left on the doorstep, and in it were pieces of electronic parts that I did not recognise, and plastic shards with the crumpled up newspaper at the bottom, and a note that said sorry with a frowny face at the top. My mother notified the police, and again they said they'd keep an eye out for anything suspicious. I feel like they're not doing anything, and that they won't do anything until I'm seriously hurt, or even worse. I took some advice from the previous comments, and now I keep glitter spray with me when I walk home from school, along with my screwdriver and a knife in my bedroom, just in case someone breaks in, but I can't do anything else, and I'm not at all confident that I could win a fight against a fully grown man. I'm worried about what will happen in the future. I don't feel safe in my home, even when the doors are locked. I check every possible place someone could be waiting for me before settling down, but I don't think it's enough. More than anything, I just want him to leave me alone. Children have been going missing. Hearing that for the first time, it's nothing new. These things happen. They come and go, finding the kids at the lost and found. Only these disappearances have been becoming more and more frequent. It might be too recent to assume that the word of the dilemma has spread up to management, but yet again, it wouldn't be surprising if they already knew. It wasn't too long ago that Pogo the Clown was brought to trial after being charged with those 33 horrific murders. In fact, it was a year ago, with more than 150 of them at least. The park's face characters are most at fault. Too many costumes walking around and taking pictures with these innocent kids. Management have never enough. Now it's the beginning of the summer season. Intercom messages of missing children persist. The worst part about it, I'm the one who was assigned to be Donald Duck at just above minimum wage. Walt Disney World, 1981. When wearing a Donald Duck headpiece, you don't see the world through the eyes of an exuberant cartoon character. You're seeing through two holes, and with the weather out today, you rely on those two holes for oxygen. You'd think somebody on the workforce would rally together a union strike for more comfortable costumes, and people have, and those people remain unemployed. Last year, 11 characters passed out due to heat stroke. Don't like it? Buck up and get over it. You're entertaining children not being drafted. That's what my boss said when I complained to him about the sun-soaking material of the suit. Me and a couple of others had formed a little clique where we would hang out during breaks. For us, it was a summer job before we went on to better things. We weren't staying here long. For the rest, however, their motivations were unknown, and that's where things got scary. It's the unknown backstories of people camouflaged in the happy-go-lucky gear. It's the fear that among a couple of delinquent and bad apples, there's a Section 8 in the crowd. The people who are unfamiliar of this occupation are probably just going to shrug these fears off. A big corporation like that, oh, you're being paranoid, background checks, they must have had them. Wrong. Keep in mind that this is in 1981. The public didn't look exactly in favour of the job, and they saw this as the same crowds as being a fry cook at McDonald's. Nothing special. When I went for my interview, I had filed all my credentials and any important paperwork in a huge binder that I dropped onto the manager's desk. I remember how he chuckled at me, looked up at me and said, "You think this is the CIA?" It bewildered me, sure, but I'd just been given a job at Disney World. A mediocre and exhausting job, sure, but I loved the idea of working there. It would look cool on my resume. There was no room to complain when bragging about it. My attitude towards this profession quickly shifted to morose as I began observing some of these employees that were so easily let in. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary to see a character begin to wobble out of exhaustion. I remember washing my hands in the employee restroom when I overheard two characters who were talking to each other from their stalls, so I was eavesdropping. I heard Minnie was caught cheating on him. Get out? With who? Bad Pete. Ouch. That's something Mickey might need to see a shrink for, don't you agree? I knew she was a cheater the second I saw her. The Mickey Mouse Club is going to have an awkward Christmas. Honest to God, that's the truth. That's what I heard. Now, I may be wrong, and that could be code talk for some gossip about other employees, but that just raises more questions. Who would be so paranoid as to only talk about people encrypted as Disney characters? Was it a joke? It sounded a bit too serious for it to be taken as a joke. Here's another one. I saw a face character take a break from all the greetings and walk up to a water fountain and start drinking with his mask on. It was after I saw that, I began viewing the park through a different set of eyes. I'd list more strange activities, but it's just the same repeated wackiness. When it came to the end of my shift, it was almost 7 p.m. I was stuffing the atrocious duck costume into my locker when I heard my name over the intercom being called. My manager wanted to see me. "You've been keeping up with this whole child abduction thing?" My boss paced back and forth on edge. "It's pretty hard not to," I replied. "So it's confirmed then, they're abductions." "This doesn't look good, and just to clarify, this whole influx of employees for summer wasn't my idea, you know," he simply replied. "I'm asking if you know of anybody at all, who is showing suspicious behaviour, particularly around kids, because I really need a miracle here." There were too many to count. "I don't hang out with pedos, so no," I said, feeling apologetic. "Those men in suits that are standing out there, they're not businessmen. They got badges, and sooner or later the higher-ups are going to find out and come down on me hard. They'll put the whole thing on me, even though I didn't do it. You get it? My reputation will be ruined. So let me ask you, what use are you?" And I wasn't any use to him, so I walked out and I finished my shift. The next day is when things really took a turn for the worst. It was my shift again. There was me, Donnie the Duck, waiting for an exciting day of taking pictures and making smiles. Suddenly, police officers, 3 of them, sprint past me. My heart stopped. This was it. One of them's getting cuffed. I rushed over to see what the ruckus was about. They line up against the door of the janitor's stockroom, pistols drawn. One of them was telling me and the vendors to back off. "Open the door and we can talk about this," one of them said. I swear to God if he did what he did," another police officer said. It was the one who lifted his foot up and busted through the wooden door, and then they stormed in. Silence. Then, No, you monster, one of them said inside. This was a hell of a trip to see because the magical kingdom was starting to sound like a filthy crime scene. This is when things started to get crazy. One of the cops dragged out one of the face characters. It was Mickey Mouse. There was red smeared all over the torso and legs. The cop throws Mickey to the ground, pulls out his baton and proceeds to beat the living crap out of him. We're talking about major wailing here with his baton and his foot, and he doesn't seem to be letting up. One of the other cops comes outside and begins puking. He finishes and begins to pull the other violent cop away from Mickey. "Let it go, man." "Screw that," the violent one said. Then a swarm of Disney's security members, about 7 or 8 of them, run over and tackle all 3 cops to the ground. While this is happening, Mickey gets up and runs away from the scene. I really wish I'd chased after the costume, but I just stood there, hoping that the security team would take notice and run after. But they didn't. "Wrong guy, wrong freaking guy. It's the guy in the costume. I'm an officer of the law. I got a badge," the violent one said. They put them in handcuffs and drag them off. The security closes the door without even looking inside, and they begin taping off the scene. The tape wasn't even police tape, it was just yellow tape that said "under construction." Already 20 minutes had passed, and the gates had opened. The park's microphones began to speak. "Welcome everyone. In celebration for decades of continued support, we're giving away free ice cream for everyone who visits any ice cream vendor. Don't wait any longer." It was after this incident that my boss was fired and replaced, and the park's face character count had dropped significantly. 3 days later, I resigned. I told this incident to Donnie. Naturally, he thought I was lying, which I thought was interesting. I would have at least thought that the other vendors would have spread this around like wildfire. Maybe they all unanimously decided that this story was too crazy to be spoken orally or written down, for good reason. I saw the disbelief in his face. He joked in response, "That cop shouldn't have cursed." Looking back, that summer felt like a Twilight Zone episode. I know it's something that I should have looked into further. However, the hard-boiled truth is that I just don't get paid enough to pursue conspiracies within a massive organisation. I've got other stuff I want to do, and I'm not a protagonist or the antagonist. I'm just a kid who got a strange job in a strange place filled with strange people during a strange time. This is an observation, not a grilling. My one piece of advice is, be careful of those who are masked and shake your hand and take their picture with you. Behind every mask is someone who wishes to remain anonymous, and behind that wish is the possibility of fantasies that go beyond terror. Two years ago, my husband Andy and I decided it was finally time to buy a house. So on April 1st, we moved into a 4,200 square foot colonial house. The catch was that it was a stone's throw away from the freeway and that the area was known for its crime more than anything else. Andy said it was just a stepping stone. We'd bank a year's worth of mortgage, hope the housing market keeps rocketing and move again in a year. There were some flaws in his plans, mainly money, but I didn't say anything. I figured we'd both adjust to like it there. The first few weeks went smooth, and me and the husband got to unpacking and introducing ourselves to the neighbours. Maybe it was the threat of crime, and that there was comfort and purpose in knowing who you lived next to, but whatever it was, our neighbours were incredibly friendly. We felt at home quite quick, and while there was some shocks, we made games out of them to take the fear away. With the pops that permeated the night, we had the game where we guessed whether the sound was fireworks or gunshots. There was a homeless problem there, for sure, but they minded their own business. Our neighbours seemed to see right through them. They acted as if they were ghosts, like they weren't even there. Hell, everyone did. I'd smile and say hello in passing. The least I could do was treat them like human beings. One night after a movie, I was at the sink washing the popcorn bowl. The window looks out to the backyard, which was heavily wooded for a city lot. When it was dark out, I could see only a sliver of what was outside beyond the reflection of myself in the glass. I frowned at the shadow of a tall dark stump. I don't remember a tree being there. I swayed on my feet to see past my reflection. In between the bushes, nearly out of sight, a man was standing still, staring back at me. My heart leaped, and I dropped the bowl where it crashed into the sink. "You okay in there, honey?" Andy shouted from the living room. "Yeah." I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Andy, not wanting to alarm him. "I'm going to take the trash out." "All right." I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. "Hello?" Outside the wind was blowing hard, and behind the branches of the buckhorn I could see a man stood there, waving wildly to me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show that I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planting my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward, more confident this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Now, this was the emptiest of threats, and everybody in the neighbourhood knew that. The man walked forward a few paces to where I could see him better. He was very tall and wore a heavy wool overcoat that stretched all the way to his ankles. He kept walking towards me. My brain was shouting, but I froze in fear. What do you want?" He stopped just in front of me. A white scar starred across his black skin just below the chin. He was at least 6'6", but the coat that ran the entire length of his body made him gigantic. His face was recently shaved and gaunt. He held out his fist at arm's length, and when he uncurled his fingers, cupped in an enormous palm, was a pill. "I don't have any drugs," I said. His face didn't change any. There was no want or question in his eyes. You want me to take it?" I pointed at his hand, but his expression stayed the same. I reached out and gently plucked the pill from his palm, and I held it between my forefinger and thumb. It was just a pill capsule. Whatever had been inside had been emptied. What do you want?" I asked again. He opened his mouth, revealing the severed stump of a tongue, and then he widened the enormous whites of his eyes. He began to mouth something, but being tongueless, I couldn't tell what. But my blood ran cold, because I felt certain it was some kind of curse. Please just leave." He turned and stepped into the night, and I watched the bushes sway in his wake as if he was a giant parting his way through the woods. The next day was Saturday, and I was determined to find out if anyone knew anything about this tall man. I walked to the strip mall, and I asked some of the homeless in the area, but as soon as I began to describe him, they all looked at the ground and shook their heads. The pattern was repeated with every other homeless person I could talk to. On my way home, I stopped by two men working on a car at the end of a driveway. "Hey, this may sound a little crazy, but do you guys know of a tall fella around here that wears a giant coat?" They both started laughing. "Sorry to waste your time." I turned to go. No. One of them waved me back. "You're talking about a really big motherfucker, right?" He raised his hand to signify. "Yay high, black coat, nasty scars?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Well, that's Tall Chuck. What you want to know about him? You see him in your recycling?" "No. Why?" "Tall Chuck's a can man. He makes his living that way." I nodded. "He was acting weird in my backyard last night." "Weird how? Was he just looking like his weird self?" "No, he was staring at me from outside, and when I went out, he tried to say something or mouth something." Both of their brows rose. "Are you saying that Tall Chuck tried to communicate with you?" "Yeah." They both looked at each other. Tall Chuck talks to nobody, and by talks I mean communicating in any kind of way. "He cut his own throat to never talk again," the other chimed in. "That's just a rumour. Tall Chuck showed up in this neighbourhood about 20 years ago, and no one knows where he came from. And the man can't tell you. Yeah, people put all kinds of legends to those scars. Some say it was a dog that bit him, but I never seen no dog that'll slice your tongue out. If he doesn't communicate with anyone, how come he has the name Tall Chuck? Well, that's what my mama would call him. She used to tell me to watch my tongue, or Tall Chuck'll take it. What do you think he wanted with me? They both shrugged. No clue. But you be sure to tell us when you find out. They bent back to their work and I thanked them and went on, far less assured than when I'd first set out. The next several days there were no sign of Tall Chuck, but I began to fall ill. It was a headache at first, but soon I had heart palpitations and body aches that I almost let take me to the emergency room. I assured myself that there was no such thing as curses. Why was I letting one strange encounter with a homeless man dominate my every thought? Andy was working late recently, and when I had the house to myself at night, I would stand at the kitchen window and stare into the backyard. I was obsessed, and it wasn't long before I did see him again. I was wrapped in a blanket, filling the teapot at the sink, when I saw him standing in the same place as before. I dropped the teapot and ran to the back door. Hey! My head felt light, and I was in that same kind of drunken state where your fear hardly speaks to you. I scampered throughout the backyard over to him. What do you want with me? Tall Chuck was staring at me. He gestured with his scarred neck for me to follow. I looked at my bare feet, but he was already walking. Hey, just leave us alone! I stepped after him cautiously. When I got past the bushes where I could see the alley, I saw him standing near the trash cans. I ran after him. You, I don't want to ever see you back here, okay? With our size difference and a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I'm sure I looked to him like some angry little hobbit. He certainly didn't act intimidated, and I can't blame him. Tall Chuck crossed the alley and sat on a crumbling retaining wall. He gently tapped the stone next to him for me to sit. I'm not fucking sitting. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out something. It was an envelope. Then he put the letter into his other hand and reached in again and pulled out another envelope. What are those? He extended the envelopes to me. His long arm stretched nearly the entire alley. I approached the letters cautiously, snatching them, and stepped back. What are these? I muttered, already distracted. They had already been opened, and I took the papers out of one of the envelopes. It was a handwritten letter on college-ruled paper. All the ink was smeared like it had been dunked in water, but I could still read it a bit, albeit slowly. When I was done reading, I let my arm fall down to the side and stared at Chuck in disbelief. Andy had a lover. I looked at the other envelope and hardly had to read it to figure it out. The letterhead read, Atlantic Life Insurance. A policy had been opened in my name for $250,000. I stumbled over to the retaining wall and sat. The pills. I thought about the empty capsule he'd shown me at first that I tossed aside. It was my emergency albuterol. It had to be. A quick WebMD search showed that an overdose started with symptoms of headaches and heart palpitations. Andy's trying to kill me. Suddenly I realised Tall Chuck's arm was around me and he was patting my shoulder paternally. We sat there in silence for a long time. The things you can learn from people's recycling, I said. Tall Chuck nodded and we watched the upstairs light turn on and my husband appeared in the window. He twisted something in his fingers and then tapped it into a mug. A minute later, I heard the back door open. Honey, are you out there? He called. I made you some tea. I guess the homeless around here don't always want change. Sometimes they might just want to save your life. Am I beautiful now? 3 years ago, I broke up with my girlfriend, Joanne. Joanne was a nice person, but I just lost attraction for her. It's not that she was ugly or anything, I'd just been with her for some years. We were high school sweethearts, and she kind of grew out of her cute phase. I'm aware I'm a jerk for saying this, but even worse, I said it to her, which was a huge mistake. Joanne didn't have much self-esteem, and breaking up with her because of her appearance completely destroyed her. In the following weeks, she went through all the 5 stages of grief. First came denial. She kept texting me and calling me. Hey baby, is everything okay? You didn't mean it when you broke up with me, did you? Then came the anger. She called me some unholy names and keyed my car, etc. I was aware of how much of an ass I was, so I let it go. Q, the bargaining. She'd call me, saying that she'd lose weight, wear makeup, have surgery. None of that mattered, and by this time I was growing tired of her behaviour. It was also around this time when I met Chloe. After this, I stopped hearing about Joanna. I assumed that by then the depression had set in, followed by acceptance. So, Chloe, she was a beautiful woman. I met her at work. Good old water cooler talk and whatnot. She had the most beautiful blue eyes, blonde hair, soft as silk, and her face looked like that of a doll. It didn't take long before I asked her on a date. We started hanging out, and We were a couple before long. Over the next few weeks, she started staying over and I had ended up giving her a house key. A few months passed and everything was great. Until that day. I had been calling Chloe all day, but she hadn't picked up once. She wasn't at work either, and nobody had seen her since the day before. I had decided I would go home after work and take a shower, change clothes, and head over to her house to check on her. When I got home, I immediately noticed something was wrong. My door was cracked open. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. When I got inside, there was something on the floor. I turned on the lights, and then I saw her. Chloe. She was laying face down on the floor, on a puddle of blood. As I was reaching down to touch her, I heard a sound coming from the bedroom. I realised we weren't alone. Heading for the bedroom, I grabbed the baseball bat I had in the hallway. The bedroom door was slightly open. I pushed it open and looked into the room as I entered. I couldn't see anyone. I went in, planning on checking the closet and the windows when I heard the door closing and locking behind me. As I turned, I can't forget what I saw. I let out a scream and threw up when I saw her. Behind me was Joanne, covered in blood, but that's not what caused my reaction. Over her face, crudely sewn, was Chloe's face.